So today we'll talk about our book, Making Grateful Kids, which talks about not only the importance of gratitude, but also providing parents with 32 scientifically supported strategies for making their kids more grateful. This book is based on about 7 years of research that my colleagues and I have done on the measurement, enhancement, and development of gratitude in children and adolescents. Our research shows that grateful kids are happier and more generous. They report higher GPAs and more satisfying and fulfilling relationships with family and friends. They also report being more connected to their neighborhoods and their communities. So rather than keeping these findings to the academic journals, we thought it was important to kind of share the science with the public. So we decided to write Making Grateful Kids to give people, again, scientifically supported strategies to help make their kids more grateful. Well, I think one of the biggest issues is our consumer-driven culture, which is why this is so important. And what we find in our research is that grateful kids are a lot less materialistic than their less grateful counterparts. So that means that these kids are less concerned with looking a certain way or acquiring the right stuff or being popular, which are all elements of being materialistic. Instead, these kids are more concerned about personal growth, strengthening new relationships and strengthening old relationships and establishing new ones, as well as giving back to their communities and neighborhoods. Technology can definitely get in the way of making kids grateful, and that's primarily when there are no limits set on their exposure. And the problem is when there is too much exposure to technology, what happens is the kids start intaking all these messages of how they should be, rather than it doesn't encourage them to learn who they are authentically through self-exploration or much thought. The other problem with this kind of limitless access to technology, it distracts them from more meaningful pursuits that could ultimately give them more reasons to be grateful. So one way to combat this, parents could very simply, is to set limits on the amount of exposure their kids have. So for instance, in our home, our kids are allowed no more than 1 hour a day of quote-unquote screen time, whether that be video games or TV. And having done this now for several years, what it's allowed our kids to do is tap into their creativity and their curiosity and their imagination more, helping them find out the activities or pursuits that do give more meaning to their life, and again, ultimately will make them more grateful in the long run. I think one of the things it's not so much that technology has to be like an either or thing. Like we said, just kind of placing limits on it, and also being actively involved and being very aware of what your child is doing with their time when they are on, let's say, the internet or whatever the case is. And there is research to show that when used properly, such as in pro-social ways, that you can use technology to strengthen relationships, whether it be sending a friend a text message, hey, I hope everything's going well, since the breakup or whatever the case is, or posting a very, thoughtful, friendly message on someone's Facebook account. That's all well and good. It's just when it's done to such an excess that it distracts you from these more meaningful pursuits, that's when it's a problem. So at the time, my daughter was 14 months old and my son was 4. And we decided to take a family trip up to New Hampshire. So for us, that would be about 16 hours in the car. So we know it's very common these days, for families to have, DVD players in the car and so on, where kids can just watch movies. But we don't have that, and we just said we're very old school in that sense. So we decided to keep all that stuff out of the car and very simply just give them opportunities to color and draw and read and listen to books on CD and music and gaze out the window and daydream and just play together. And what was so beautiful is that before we started that trip, in my head I was thinking, wow, 16 hours with 2 young kids, this could be a little tough. I'm in an enclosed cabin for an extended period of time. But because we are so old school in our play with regards to, again, this basic kind of creativity with Play-Doh and coloring and stuff, and limited exposure to screens, they were able to withstand this 16-hour trip, and not just withstand it, but actually enjoy it and have a great time with it. And we all did. In our book, we talk about many tips on how to raise grateful kids. But I think, probably one of the biggest ones, which is often overlooked, is very simply is modeling it. So as parents, we need to be who we want our kids to be. So if we want them to become grateful, we need to be grateful ourselves in our own expression, in our own behaviors. So being concrete, one example could be writing thank you cards or thank you notes to people. And when you do that, it's very important to let your kids know what it is you're doing, why you're doing it, who you're doing it to. And again, done over time, it will allow them to see the importance of showing the expression and making other people feel good and appreciated for their kindness to you, but it also lets them see the importance of when others are generous to each other. And again, when done over time, you will start noticing some pretty big changes. So for example, this is something I'm particularly very big on, is writing thank you notes or cards to people, and always involving my kids in that and letting them see what's going on. So I think it's starting to pay off, because the other day we were at a Cub Scout meeting for my 7-year-old, and one of the dads gave this great presentation at a local firehouse on what it's like to be a firefighter and fire safety and things like that. So after this presentation, my son, without me saying anything, runs over to the guy and says, "Hey, Mr. So-and-so, I'm going to go home and I'm going to write you a thank you note." So in my head, I'm thinking, well, that would be great, but let's really see what happens when we get home. So I don't say anything. We get home. As soon as we get home, he makes a dash for his construction paper. He gets out the crayons, and he writes a very simple card. "Dear Mr. So-and-so, thank you for teaching us about fire safety, from James," and it drew a picture of a firefighter on the front. So my point is, with time and consistency and effort, if you allow your kids to see you modeling grateful expression or grateful behavior, they indeed will pick it up for sure. We've been studying, gratitude in children and adolescents for the past 7 years now. A lot of work has gone into that, but I think the studies that I'm most excited about are ones that we recently finished, where we created this school-based curriculum to help kids learn how to think gratefully, actually process beneficial exchanges in a grateful way. And what we found was that the kids who received our curriculum, compared to the controls, they reported being happier and more grateful up to 5 months later. But also what was so nice is that these kids who received this curriculum wrote and delivered 80% more thank you cards to their PTA for a presentation on character development that the PTA just sponsored. And we were so excited, and still are, about that latter finding, because this is the first gratitude intervention study showing that becoming more grateful actually is related with changes in behavior, not just some kind of self-report where I say I'm happy or I'm satisfied. These kids actually changed their actual behavior, so that was a really big deal. Our work on the book and our research in general has affected our families tremendously. So for instance, I now am well aware of the importance that I have to place on this. So if I want my kids to become grateful, the bottom line is I have to make this a priority, and I have to put daily effort into this. And I can see that the benefits it's starting to pay off. So for example, I'm very big to highlight to my kids a beautiful sunset or a nice sunrise or the changing color of the leaves. And now, having been consistent with that, they're starting to do the same for me. So for example, my 3-year-old daughter and I went for a walk the other day, and we're walking, and all of a sudden she just stops dead in her tracks. And she goes, Daddy, look at the beautiful sunset. Look, isn't that gorgeous? Isn't that beautiful? And she was just hopping up and down, and she was so excited. And for me, I said, you know what, how wonderful is this, that you're 3 years old and you're starting to get this sense of appreciation for life in general, that there is a lot of good out there if you slow down and kind of take it in and process it the right way. So that's been one of the many ways that this work has influenced my family. Well, the bottom line is the hassles, the irritants, the nonsense, it's always going to be there, and the research shows that bad is stronger than good. So it doesn't take much bad in our lives to really put us in a tailspin, but it sometimes takes a lot of good to put us in this kind of upward spiral. So I think one of the very simplest things is that we need to just slow down. We move way, way too fast. And in order to feel grateful and take in the good that we have, we got to go slow. We got to be a little more mindful with what we have going on. I think a huge thing is we have to start to rid ourselves of some of these unnecessary distractions that we have, which just pulls us away from the immediate all the time. So a very simple, concrete example would be, I've recently, when at home, I put my cell phone on vibrate. And it's so simple, but I can't tell you the amount of peace that I have and that our home has, and how much more I'm able to appreciate and be grateful for my family, because I don't have this thing making all these sorts of sounds demanding my attention. So I think slowing down, ridding ourselves of some distractions, and being a little bit more mindful with where we are instead of being pulled and all over the place, I think that would be a very great way to become more grateful. I've been teaching here at Hofstra for 7 years now, and by far for me the greatest thing about this job is being able to mentor young people. I feel like a lot of students, myself included when I was a young person, it's very tough to make that decision of what do I want to do with the rest of my life, and some people suggest that people between the ages of late adolescence and early adulthood, about 20% of them are quote-unquote rudderless. They really don't have that sense of purpose or direction in life. So when I have that opportunity to teach these kids and to hopefully give them a sense of passion, for psychology or learning, and meeting with them for coffee and walking around campus and just, talking about different ideas and stuff. For me, giving back and helping out the next generation is by far the greatest part of this job, without a question.